You know what's strange? We talk endlessly about boomers and millennials. It's a culture war that's been played out at dinner tables and all over the internet for years. But there's this entire generation that just sort of exists in the middle, almost invisible. Generation X. This isn't just a story about who's loudest or most seen. It's about the quiet psychological wiring of this forgotten generation and how their independence, born from empty houses and the low hum of a refrigerator, might just make them the unlikely survivors of a world they didn't create but have quietly learned to master. We've been taught to see history as a pendulum swinging between two massive forces: the baby boomers, who built the institutions, and the millennials, who are now challenging and reshaping them. One is a generation defined by its post-war optimism and institutional loyalty. The other, a digital native group driven by collaboration and a search for purpose. They are the two loud voices in the room, defining the argument. In this struggle, Generation X, that smaller, scrappier group, born between 1965 and 1980, has been treated like a footnote. But to overlook them is to miss the point entirely. It fails to recognize that the very conditions that made Gen X feel invisible were, in fact, a kind of psychological training ground. It created a unique blend of pragmatism, resilience, and fierce independence that the other generations don't possess in quite the same way. And this brings us to the core idea. In a world of increasing chaos, economic volatility, and rapid disruption, the psychological traits of Gen X make them uniquely suited to survive. Their entire existence has been an exercise in adaptation. They weren't given the economic boom of the boomers, nor were they digitally native like millennials. They were raised in the shadow of crises: the oil shock, stagflation, and the constant, low-grade anxiety of the Cold War. This environment didn't create the boomers' faith in systems or the millennials' drive for collaborative change. It created something far more practical: self-reliance. It produced a generation of individuals who learned not to wait for the institution to save them or for the team to validate them. They learned to save themselves. Their defining psychology isn't based on optimism or idealism, but on a pragmatic, often skeptical, assessment of reality. And this skepticism, this ability to operate without a safety net, isn't a bug. It's their core feature. It's the survival toolkit the coming decades will demand. This isn't about celebrating neglect. It's a psychological case study. It's an exploration of how a specific set of historical conditions created a mindset uniquely suited for the turbulence of the 21st century. While boomers and millennials are still fighting over the rules of the game, Gen X has been quietly preparing for a different one their entire lives. As leaders, they built the top-down management systems that define the 20th century workplace. They believe in paying your dues and putting in the hours. To them, long hours were a sign of dedication, not a failure of work-life balance. This perspective is a direct product of their formative experiences. They built a world that rewarded structure and loyalty because, for them, that was the formula for success. Then came the millennials, born between 1981 and 1996. Their experience of the world was fundamentally different. Their formative years were marked by jarring events. They saw the 9/11 attacks shatter a sense of security. They grew up with the explosion of the internet, making them the first true digital natives. And many graduated from college right into the Great Recession. These events forged a psychological profile that was, in many ways, a reaction to the boomer ethos. Where boomers were competitive, millennials became collaborative. Growing up online, they learned to build communities and work in networks rather than rigid hierarchies. They are less interested in the individual success that motivated their parents and more driven by a search for purpose and work-life balance. The idea of staying at one company for 40 years seems nonsensical in an economy they've only known as unpredictable. Millennials are often called idealistic, but it's a pragmatic idealism. They believe in social progress and demand that the companies they work for have a purpose beyond just profit. This isn't just a preference. It's a core value shaped by seeing the failures of older systems. While boomers built institutions, millennials focus on disrupting them or creating new, more inclusive ones. This makes them powerful agents of change, but also vulnerable to a world that often falls short of their expectations. And now we come to the gap, the often overlooked Generation X. They weren't the celebrated children of a post-war boom, nor were they the digital darlings of the new millennium. They were, in a word, on their own. This was the first generation of latchkey kids on a massive scale. While their parents were busy climbing the corporate ladder or navigating rising divorce rates, Gen X kids were coming home to an empty house. That experience, letting yourself in, making your own snack, and navigating the world with a profound lack of adult oversight, became the crucible for the Gen X psyche. It didn't just teach them responsibility, it hardwired independence into their nervous system. They grew up improvising and solving problems on their own, without any expectation of applause. This fostered a powerful sense of self-reliance that remains their defining trait. Their formative years were a stream of bad news. They watched the Challenger explode on live television, lived through economic recessions, and came of age under the shadow of the AIDS crisis. All of this fostered a deep-seated skepticism. They learned from a very young age not to put too much trust in institutions or promises of a secure future. This psychological armor has profound implications. It helps explain their high rates of entrepreneurship. Some reports from a few years ago showed that Gen X accounted for the majority of startup founders. They don't wait for permission. In the workplace, this translates to a hatred of micromanagement. For a Gen Xer, being micromanaged isn't just annoying, it's a deep personal insult to the inner child who raised themselves. It signals a lack of trust, and for a generation that learned to trust no one but themselves, that is the ultimate offense. They value autonomy and efficiency, not as a perk, but as a non-negotiable term of engagement. Their comfort with uncertainty means they are more likely to take calculated risks. They'll start a small business from their kitchen table or pivot to a completely new trade. They don't need a support group, and they don't need a manager's permission. They need results. Their entire life has been an exercise in adapting to systems that have failed them. This is just another Tuesday. So, who wins? The boomers built the arena. The millennials are trying to change the rules. But Gen X has been playing a different game all along, a game of survival. Their psychological profile, forged in benign neglect, economic uncertainty, and social upheaval, has equipped them with a unique toolkit: radical self-reliance, pragmatic skepticism, and a quiet, unshakable resilience. They are not the loudest or the largest generation, but in an increasingly unstable world, they may be the most prepared. They are the bridge, the translators, and the unsung backbone of our society. They are the survivors. What's the most Gen X thing you've ever done or seen someone do? That moment of quiet competence in the middle of a crisis? Share your story in the comments below.